Amid the buzz over a peace deal between US and Iran, US President Donald Trump has tempered expectations of a deal by saying that he has told his negotiators not to rush into a deal.
In a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote that negotiations between the two sides are proceeding in an orderly and constructive manner, but he has instructed U.S. negotiators not to rush into a deal since time is on Washington's side. Further, Trump said that the U.S. naval blockade in Hormuz will remain in force until a final agreement is sealed.
Well, in another post on Truth Social, Trump lashed out at those criticizing a possible deal to end the 3-month war with Iran, calling them losers. Trump also hit out at the Obama administration, accusing it of signing what he called one of the worst deals ever, which gave Tehran a direct path to developing nuclear weapons. Trump was referring to the 2015 deal signed between Iran, US and the European Union, the JCPOA.
Now, Trump also shared an image on Truth Social which appeared to show a fighter jet loaded with a missile, and the missile was engraved with the words, "Thank you for your attention to this matter."
Well, Iran responded to Trump's post with an image which appeared to show wrecked remains of aircraft and missiles, signaling Tehran's warning of a strong retaliation to any fresh attack by the US.
Now, Iran's nuclear program is the biggest sticking point in negotiations between the two sides. On Sunday, U.S. reports suggested that the agreement would include a commitment from Iran that it will not pursue nuclear weapons. However, now this claim was later rejected by Iran. Now, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has said that Iran is not after nuclear weapons. Further, Pezeshkian said that Iran will not make any decision without the permission of Supreme Leader Moshtaba Khamenei.
We are ready for talks. Just as we had raised this issue during the time of our martyred supreme leader, we are now also ready to reassure the world that we are not seeking nuclear weapons. We are not seeking instability in the region. The destabilizing force in the region is Israel, which is pursuing the Greater Israel Plan and is conspiring in various ways to sustain war, instability, and division in the region.
Meanwhile, thousands of Iranians gathered in Tehran for a ceremony organized by the IRGC to pay tribute to victims of the wars with the US and Israel, including the 12-day war that took place in June last year.
If America backs down from its demands and accepts Iran's conditions, I think we can talk about it, but we cannot ignore the blood of the leader and the children of Minab, and we must avenge them.
All right, to discuss more on this, we're being joined live by Georgia Kefiro. He's a professor of Georgetown University and CEO Gulf State Analytics. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Always a pleasure talking to you. Now, there is a cautious optimism coming in from the U.S. regarding this deal. But do you see some sort of positiveness in sort of like going ahead on a deal, at least not on nuclear, what we've seen, but at least on the Strait of Hormuz or any such other topic?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back on your program. You know, I think it's quite clear that throughout this conflict that erupted in late February, the Trump administration's goals have been constantly shifting, and it's very clear that Washington has not been able to achieve any of these objectives during the conflict. And I think at this point, what the Trump administration is trying to do is essentially cut losses, in understanding that the longer this conflict continues, the more the U.S. has to lose. And I think, obviously, it's clear that the midterm elections are getting closer and closer, and there are political calculations that the Trump team is making, which inform this view that it will be better to wind down this conflict, or at least freeze the conflict with some sort of an agreement sooner rather than later. That being said, there are some sticking points, some issues that remain unresolved. These efforts to arrive at an agreement also take place in an environment in which the Iranians really do not have any reason to trust the United States. Let's not forget about the fact that the June 2025 war and then also this war that began in February both erupted when talks were taking place, and also Israel has potential to play a spoiling role here. So I think optimism about an agreement is one that we need to be very cautious about. But it also makes sense that at this point, the Trump administration is trying to get some sort of an agreement without making it seem as though the United States is desperate to enter an agreement.
Professor Cafiero, cautious optimism is one thing, but is there any reality that is going to shape up here in terms of a deal? Let's quickly go over the sticking points, as you'd mentioned. Nuclear dust, no clarity on where that's going to go, which country will keep it and for how long. Nuclear program, Iran doesn't want to discuss it right now. They want to halt the hostilities completely and then take it up at a later stage. So no clarity there either. You come to the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump says it's going to be opened. Iran says it's going to remain in their fold. Again, no clarity there either, not jointly. And then let's talk about the missile program, which at one point was also one of the objectives of the war. Now it finds no mention in any of these messages that are coming out from either side, from Donald Trump or at least US. What deal are we talking about?
Well, it's obvious that both sides would have to make some concessions to the other. I think right now the Trump administration is trying to do something about the fact that the status quo is having a very disruptive effect on the global economy, and that also includes a very harmful impact on the U.S. economy. So I think reaching some sort of an arrangement with the Iranians on the Strait of Hormuz is a high priority. I think as painful as it will be for the Trump administration, there's probably going to have to be some sort of a reckoning with the fact that Iran will maintain some sort of a control over the strait that it did not have before this war began. But if there can be some sort of an arrangement where the strait is open, I think there's certainly room for a compromise between the two sides. The nuclear issue is also one that is difficult to overcome, but I definitely think there is potential for the two sides to overcome that issue. If Iran is going to be able to make concessions that the Trump team finds acceptable, and if the Trump team can make concessions on this front and really stick with the position that nuclear weapons at any point in the future held by Iran, unacceptable, but some sort of a nuclear program can be accepted. Within that context, there is room for the two sides to bridge the gap. What's ironic is that this may be an arrangement which is not completely unlike the 2015 JCPOA. How the two sides will reach an agreement on the nuclear issue that differs from the JCPOA, that's an open question. Trump bashed that deal, always calling it the Obama deal, but perhaps what he ultimately brings the U.S. into, assuming he is able to reach an agreement with Tehran, might end up looking something similar to JCPOA, but there will have to be some differences so that at least for domestic purposes, Trump can sell it as a better deal than what Obama was able to negotiate on behalf of the U.S. back during his presidency.
Then there's also, of course, it's not just U.S. and Iran. We have Israel, as you also mentioned. Now we have Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has commented that the president and him has agreed that any final agreement with Iran must eliminate nuclear threat entirely. Now, clearly, Iran has responded saying that there is no way they're working on a nuclear weapon. But if at all, U.S. agrees with Iran on some sort of deal, what kind of role will Israel be playing, or would they agree with whatever U.S. and Iran would agree upon? Because one of the things that Iran has demanded is, of course, the end of war on all fronts, which includes the war in Lebanon. Do you think Israel will agree to that?
It depends on how the United States uses its leverage. To be sure, Israel's government does not want to see a triumph of diplomacy right now. Israel would like to see the United States resume its military operations against Iran rather than enter into an agreement with Iran, which would entail Washington making certain concessions to the Islamic Republic. That being said, Israel needs the support of the Trump administration in general. So if the Trump administration decides to go down the diplomatic path and enter into some sort of an agreement with Iran, and if the Trump administration tells Israel that if it is going to spoil the diplomacy through the bombing Iran, for example, that there would be consequences in the form of military and economic aid being cut off. Israel will not be in a position to defy the White House. And Israel would have to bitterly go along with some sort of a diplomatic agreement that the Trump administration chooses to enter into. That being said, if the Trump administration is not going to put that pressure on Israel, then I think everyone needs to be worried about Israel engaging in destabilizing behavior in this upcoming period that could completely sabotage any hope for diplomacy.
True. On the other hand, we also have, of course, the GCC states. And what we've heard is Saudi Arabia is now mulling a non-aggression pact with its neighbors and Iran. In that sort of pact, where do you see the role of U.S. coming in? And can Saudi Arabia, on its part with the GCC states, sort of make out a deal with Iran themselves?
Well, I think it's a consequence of the Trump administration's decision to start this war, as well as the ways in which Iran retaliated with missile and drone attacks against Saudi Arabia and a whole host of other countries in the neighborhood. The GCC states are not able to see the American security umbrella as they did in previous years, previous decades. For a long time, the Gulf Arab monarchies have been losing confidence in the U.S. as a security guarantor. But because of everything that's unfolded since February 28th, it's difficult for them to even associate the concept of a security guarantor with the United States. So while each GCC state is certainly unique in its foreign policy and unique in its approach to Iran, I believe that throughout the GCC, there is a general understanding, for the most part, that there needs to be some sort of engagement with the Iranians and a dialogue with the Iranians. And there needs to be a way for the Arab countries in the Persian Gulf, as well as the Islamic Republic, to sort of share the neighborhood and to reach some common understandings. And I think this is really about local actors trying to find local solutions, with the GCC states trying to become less dependent on Washington. I'll wrap this up by saying this was a trend set in motion years ago, but I would say that since February 28th, the GCC states have had to become more serious about becoming increasingly autonomous from Washington.
Understood. And that's very apparent from the deals that they're cutting with Ukraine for air defenses, that Saudi Arabia and UAE doing this in a blitz. They've even looked at the Iron Dome. It's already deployed. Otherwise, these deals take years. They've been done in a matter of weeks. So that gives you the desperation for them to diversify their air defense architecture. Let's wait and watch how this one pans out. Professor Kafiro, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for making time.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you both.
Yes.